further about so many things. आपने बात की है basically कि colonization has invented so many things on the ground, that the impact on the ground is to create divisions. And it keeps on happening again and again, even though the first Europeans entered South Asian region in 1610 and earlier. मगर वो उनके असरात अभी तक इस तरह से हैं क्योंकि तालीम भी वही है और उसी लिंग्विस्टिक्स को हम यूज करें, उसी क्या कहना चाहिए, क्राइटेरिया को यूज करें. आपने डायलेक्ट्स और लैंग्वेज की डिवीजन की भी बात की, म्यूचुअल इंटेलिजिबिलिटी अंडरस्टैंडिंग की भी बात की है, जैसे आपने उर्दू और हिंदी की मिसाल दी है. और फिर आपने बोली की डिस्टिंक्शन के बारे में भी बताया है. तो इसका मतलब है कि जैसे अगर किसी इकोसिस्टम में कोई खराबी होती है एक नेचुरल एनवायरनमेंट में, तो वो उसमें हमें नजर आ जाता है कि लैंड स्लाइडिंग हो रही है, अब दरख्त कट गए हैं और इस तरह की चीजें. मगर ये जो जुबान और मुआशरे के ऊपर जो कॉलोनियल स्ट्रक्चर्स डाले जाते हैं और इन्फोर्स किए जाता है दूसरा सिस्टम, उसके असरात उस तरह से कंक्रीट फिजिकली नहीं होते, मगर उसके असरात जो है वो और सूरत में नजर आते हैं. लोग ग्रोहों की सूरत में तब्दील हो जाते हैं और एक दूसरे से अपनी जुबान, अपनी आइडेंटिटी और डिफरेंट रीजंस की वजह से लड़ना शुरू कर देते हैं. तो इसका मतलब है कि जो आपने ये बात, मतलब आपने अपने सवालों के जवाब में यही समझाया कि colonization has not ended. And you have written about this in your book as well. You have given many examples as well. For instance, ब्राहवी जुबान की आपने मिसाल अपनी किताब में दी है कि किस तरह से वो उस जमाने में जो लिंग्विस्टिक्स की डिफरेंट वो स्टैंडर्डाइजेशन हो रही थी और नाम दिए जा रहे थे किताबों का, तो वो किस तरह से उस वक्त शुरू हुआ. अब अगर कॉलोनाइजेशन खत्म नहीं हुई और ये जो आप सबाल्टर्न प्रैक्टिसेस की मिसाल दे रहे हैं कि आपने कहा है कि दिस इज नॉट द ओनली वे टू डू इट, बट आम फहम जुबान में आप बताइए कि और ये मतलब सबाल्टर्न प्रैक्टिसेस क्या हैं और किस तरह से we can use it if we want to use it. And also if you could maybe give some examples of student projects who have used such kind of subaltern practices in their projects.
तो जब हम रिकग्नाइज कर लेते हैं कि यूरोपियन एकेडमिक सोर्सेस और एजुकेशनल सोर्सेस से जो इन्फॉर्मेशन आ रही है वो एक तो उसमें एक्यूरेसी उसकी कम है और दूसरा ये कि उसकी इंटेंशनैलिटी जो है वो क्वेश्चनेबल है. तो उसका मतलब ये है कि हमको ऑल्टरनेट प्रैक्टिसेस बनाना है जिससे हम इन चीज़ों को काउंटर कर सकें. ठीक है, कि हमारी अप्रोचेस में ये चीज़ें एम्बेडेड नहीं हों जो कि कॉलोनियल अप्रोचेस में हैं. तो उसका मतलब ये कि एक तो हमको लिटरेसी पे डिपेंडेंसी छोड़ना है. ठीक है, लिटरेसी एक टूल है, टूल्स बहुत होते हैं और लिटरेसी एक टूल है, जिसके पास है वो उसमें पार्टिसिपेट करे, बिल्कुल करना चाहिए. मगर ये ज़रूरी नहीं है कि हर किसी की लिटरेसी इक्वली हो और हर किसी की को जजमेंट, उसका इवेल्यूएशन उसकी लिखाई पढ़ाई की सलाहियत पे हो. लोग और भी तरीक़े से कंट्रीब्यूट कर सकते हैं कम्युनिटी में और प्रोजेक्ट्स में, और हर तरह के कंट्रीब्यूशन को इक्वली रिकग्नाइज करने की ज़रूरत है. तो फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल, अगर देहात में एक खाला ने अपने बच्चों के साथ मिलकर अगर कोई प्रोजेक्ट बनाया जिससे पानी वहाँ पे अब बहाव बेहतर हो गया और वहाँ पे कूड़ा जो है, कचरा जो है वो पानी से सेपरेटेड है और उससे पानी को इन्फेक्ट नहीं कर रहा, तो उससे कम्युनिटी की हेल्थ बेहतर होगी. तो ये प्रोजेक्ट सबाल्टर्न प्रोजेक्ट हो गया. और इसको क्रिएट करने के लिए जो कुछ किया लोगों ने, जो एग्जांपल्स देखी, जो कुछ पढ़ा, जो कुछ सुना, जो कुछ एक्सपीरियंस किया, जो कुछ एक्सपेरिमेंट किया, वो सारा प्रोसेस है उसका, जिसमें लिटरेसी कंट्रीब्यूट करती है, मगर इट्स नॉट द ओनली सोर्स. और नोट करिए कि मेन पर्पस ये है कि कम्युनिटी खुद जो है अपनी प्रॉब्लम्स को आइडेंटिफाई करके उनकी सॉल्यूशंस की तरफ खुद बढ़ती है. یہ کی ایجنٹ اسپیکٹ ہے کہ ہم فار ایگزامپل یہ ریکگنائز کریں کہ ہماری لینگویجز جو ہیں وہ انڈینجرڈ ہیں اور لوگ اپنی بولی نہیں بولتے اور اس کی عزت نہیں کرتے کیونکہ اس میں ان کو اکنامک اپرچونیٹیز نہیں ملتی. تو یہ ہم آبزرو کر سکتے ہیں ایز اسٹوڈنٹس ایز ایکیڈیمکس آف لینگویجز. تو یہ ہمیں پتہ ہے تھرو آبزرویشن اینڈ ریسرچ کہ لینگویجز آر ڈائنگ آؤٹ. اور یہ بھی پتہ ہے اس کی وجہ یہ ہے کہ پیپل ڈونٹ فائنڈ اکنامک انسینٹیوز ان دیئر اون لینگویج, دے ڈونٹ ہیو پریسٹیج ان دیئر اون لینگویج. تو اس کا سولوشن یہ ہے کہ ہم ایک اکنامک انسینٹیوز بنا دیں, ہم کریٹ کریں اکنامک انسینٹیوز لینگویج کے اندر, ہم اس کی پریسٹیج بڑھا دیں. تو اس کی آلٹر کریں, یہ نہیں کہ پڑھیں کہ ایٹیٹیوڈس کیا ہیں لوگوں کے, بلکہ یہ فوکس کریں کہ ہم ایٹیٹیوڈس کو انہینس کیسے کریں, پریسٹیج لینگویج کی کیسے بڑھائیں, اس میں اکانومی کیسے کریٹ کریں. تو فار ایگزامپل ایک پروجیکٹ جو میں نے فری لنگوسٹکس کے ساتھ شروع کیا تھا 2018 میں, وہ ملاکا میں ہم لوگوں نے لینگویج ٹریولس آرگنائز کیا ود ملاکن پورچوگیز کمیونٹی ان کولیبریشن ود یونیورسٹی آف ملایا, ان کا فیکلٹی آف لینگویجز, ہم لوگ یونیورسٹی آف سڈنی میں, اور ملاکن پورچوگیز کمیونٹی اٹ سیلف. اور ہم لوگوں نے ایک لینگویج ٹریولس ڈیولپ کیا, یہ پورا پروجیکٹ جس کے تھرو ہم نے ایک پیڈاگوجی کریٹ کی, ٹیچنگ مٹیریل کریٹ کیا اس لینگویج میں, اور لوگوں کو ٹرین کیا کہ اپنی لینگویج کو کیسے بڑھائیں. پھر اس کے بعد لینگویج ٹریولس میں لوگوں نے پیسے دیے کمیونٹی کو کہ کمیونٹی میں جا کے رہیں بھی اور ان کی زبان بھی سیکھیں, ان کا کلچر بھی سیکھیں. اور اس پورے پروسیس میں کمیونٹی نے اکانومی جنریٹ کی, پیسے جنریٹ کیے. اس کے بعد ایک دفعہ انہوں نے سیکھ لی کمیونٹی نے, اس کے بعد وہ خود کرتے ہیں, وہ ہر سال خود ہی کرتے ہیں اپنا لینگویج ٹریولس پلان اور خود وہ پیسے جنریٹ کرتے ہیں. تو اس سے ان کی لینگویج میں ریسورسز بھی کریٹ ہوتی ہیں, اس میں اس کی لینگویج سے اکانومی بھی جنریٹ ہوتی ہے, اس کے تھرو ان کی لینگویج کی پریسٹیج بھی بڑھتی ہے. تو اس کی وجہ سے ان کی لینگویج کی مینٹیننس کی چانسز بڑھ جاتے ہیں. تو یہ ایک پروجیکٹ ہے فار ایگزامپل جو ہم نے کیا اسٹوڈنٹس کے ساتھ مل کر. اب میں اسی پروجیکٹ کو ہم لوگ آگے ایکسٹینڈ کر رہے ہیں. ایک اور اسٹوڈنٹ گروپ ہے جو اب اسے انڈونیشیا میں کریٹ کر رہا ہے اس سال, ہوپفلی لیٹ سپٹمبر ارلی اکتوبر میں. ہم لوگ لمبوک کے آئیلینڈ میں ساسک لینگویج کے ساتھ کے لیے بھی یہی پروجیکٹ کریٹ کر رہے ہیں. اس کے علاوہ میرے کچھ اسٹوڈنٹس ہیں جو چائنا میں اپنے ڈائلیکٹ, سچوان میں ان کا جو ڈائلیکٹ ہے اس کے لیے چیزیں ڈیولپ کر رہے ہیں. تو یہ ایک پروجیکٹ ہے, ایگزامپل ہے, جس کے تھرو صرف یہ نہیں کہ ہم میٹیریل ڈیولپ کر رہے ہیں بلکہ ہم لینگویج کو امپاور کر رہے ہیں, اس کی پریسٹیج بڑھا رہے ہیں, اور اس کے تھرو لوگوں کو جابس دے رہے ہیں, لوگوں کو پیسے کمانے کی ایک ذریعہ دے رہے ہیں. تو جب لوگ اپنی ہی بولی کے اندر پیسے کمانے کا ذریعہ ان کو ملتا ہے تو پھر وہ آبویسلی اپنی بولی کو سنبھالیں گے, اس کو مینٹین کریں گے, اس کو بڑھائیں گے. تو یہ ایک ایگزامپل ہے سبالٹرن پروجیکٹ کا, کریڈیبل پروجیکٹ کا, جہاں ہم پروجیکٹس کریٹ کرتے ہیں فار دی بیٹرمنٹ آف دا کمیونٹی. دا گول از ناٹ ریسرچ اٹ سیلف. ریسرچ از اے اسٹیپ ٹوورڈس کریٹنگ پریکٹس اینڈ کریٹنگ ریسورسز. Now the thing is, میں اپنے اسٹوڈنٹس کا یہ پروجیکٹ کرتا ہوں تو وہ ایک سیمسٹر کے اندر ود ان اے پیریڈ آف 13 weeks, 13 ہفتے, یعنی کہ 3.5 مہینے, 3.5 مہینے میں فرام کنسیپچلائزیشن, انسیپشن ٹو کنسیپچلائزیشن ٹو کریشن آف دا مٹیریل ٹو امپلیمنٹیشن, سارا کا سارا کر لیتے ہیں اور رپورٹ بھی لکھ دیتے ہیں. تو اٹس ڈیفینیٹلی ڈویبل. اور they find it more engaging, they find it more rewarding, they spend more time doing these projects because they can feel that they are contributing to something that is a need in their own communities. Very often یہ اسٹوڈنٹس جو ہیں میرے پروجیکٹس جو کرتے ہیں وہ اپنے جہاں پہ انہوں نے اسکول میں پڑھا تھا اس اسکولس کے ساتھ کرتے ہیں, جدھر یونیورسٹی میں پڑھا تھا اس کے ساتھ کرتے ہیں, جدھر پہلے کام کرتے تھے ان کمپنی کے ساتھ کرتے ہیں, جہاں رہتے تھے اس کمیونٹی کے ساتھ کرتے ہیں. تو ان کی اپنی جو ہے کمیونٹیز کے ساتھ انگیجمنٹ ہوتا ہے, اس میں ان کو اپنی نالج ڈیولپ ہوتی ہے, اپنی لینگویج استعمال کرتے ہیں, ملٹیپل ذرائع ہوتے ہیں نالج کے, اوبیسلی ایکیڈیمک نالج بھی ہے مگر اس کے علاوہ انٹرویوز ہیں, انگیجمنٹ ہے ایڈلٹ سے, اپنے ایلڈر سے, بزرگوں سے, سب کچھ سیکھنا, اس کو اس چیزوں کو میٹیریل میں کنورٹ کرنا, ان کو امپلیمنٹ کرنا, سب کچھ کرتے ہیں. اینڈ اٹ آل ہیپنس ود ان اے سیمسٹر. Right, so it is feasible, it is doable. And I think we have at least one person here I think Sayyida Sohrab I noticed that she was participating earlier on. She's actually a part of one of the courses that I'm teaching this semester, जहाँ पे a part of being engaged with a group of students who are developing this material, and she will be piloting that material in Pakistan. So she's she's seeing it firsthand on how it can be done, and so part of it is actually the book that I was telling you about, the textbook. That's part of it is coming out of that teaching, and hopefully part of that context as well. Okay, I'm going to stop again. I talk a lot.
No. This was sorry, really enlightening, and it kind of covered all my questions. और जो आपने ये मतलब I think this has given us good idea about how we can practice as teachers, the subaltern practice, and we can carry out and make it more creative according to the needs of our own students. अब तकरीबन वक्त आखिर की तरफ आ रहा है, तो मैं चाहूंगी कि मैं आपसे एक ये सवाल पूछूं। हालांकि जो उसके अंदर किताब के अंदर टॉपिक्स हैं, उनमें से बहुत से ऐसी चीजें हैं जिनके बारे में मैं आपसे पूछना चाहूंगी, मगर मेरे ख्याल में कुछ वो छोड़ भी देते हैं ताकि बाकी सब लोग वो जब बुक पढ़ें तो उससे भी उनको इस्तेफादा हासिल हो। तो जो मैं आपसे क्वेश्चन ये पूछना चाहूंगी कि एज एन ऑथर, व्हाट वाज द one of the most challenging or rewarding part of putting this book together over the course of your research and writing process? And the second part of the question is that, is there anything else you'd like to share with the readers about the core message or significance of this work, which we haven't touched upon in this conversation?
Wow. Oh, that's not an easy question at all. I've enjoyed all of parts of it. It's been very therapeutic as well. You would notice that the introduction of myself in that book reflects three different identities: Ahmar Mahboob, Sunny Boy Brumby, and Prof Nomad. In a sense, this book captures the emergence of various identities that are included there. It includes also a number of other very personal experiences and aspects through which I learned how to use the concept of identity as a tool. So rather than thinking of identity as a label, so naam as a label, I prefer to think of identity as a tool. I can use it as a tool. So when I was struggling as Ahmar Mahboob, I realized I can abandon that identity and recreate myself as Sunny Boy Brumby. And in doing that, I'm using identity as a tool, as a strategy of addressing an issue that I had. As part of this whole journey, part of what I had to do with my University of Sydney is for the HR at the University of Sydney, I changed my ethnicity. I used to be other South Asian, and then I changed it to Aboriginal Australian. And of course, when I did that, I got a query from HR. How can you change your ethnicity? I just did. And I explained to them how Australia does not actually have a definition of Aboriginality, but it has three conditions that it considers. And I meet all three of those conditions. And hence, I am an Aboriginal, and I have been adopted as an Aboriginal. I live on land with the Aboriginal people of the land as an Aboriginal member of the community, as an adopted son. And hence, I have claim to the ethnicity. So the university considered it, and they have accepted it. So now I am Aboriginal at the University of Sydney. I'm counted towards that. So notice how, in a sense, this book is a journey that documents all that shift, which of course also reflects a very difficult part of my life through which I had to engage with very difficult personal and professional challenges, some of which are ongoing, of course, to grapple with them, to create these strategies, to help myself, in a sense, to move forward. and to build with strength, because it's very easy for people from a third world, marginalized perspective to be trampled over within the domains of power and the corridors of power that the institution where I work, for example, represents. So that's realizing that identity is a strategy. I have to actually write more on this. I haven't really written up on this yet, but I think it's very important for us to realize that one of the things we could do with all the labels that have been given to us by the colonials is we can shift them from being identity markers as resources and tools that we can use to achieve goals that we might have. Now, how that's done will have to be dependent on the circumstances. But I think that's been a very important lesson among many other lessons that I have learned, that identity is a tool. It's not a label.
Thank you very much. That was a very powerful response to my question. And on that note, I would also like to say that similar to Edward Said's Orientalism, which springs from Edward Said's own positionality and his personal experience of being an Arab and Palestinian and a Middle Eastern person in exile, I see kind of similar themes, as we've already mentioned, the progression of your personal life and professional life. And also you bring in the experiences of a Pakistani, a South Asian, first generation migrant in exile, which kind of brings your experiences both in the global South and the global North, and which I would say resonate with many people, both the South Asian or Pakistani. And in this process, which you just mentioned, the progression of your book and your professional identities and personal identities, I would like to borrow the metaphor which you have used, the unmaking of the paradise. And you've also mentioned undoing paradise, that before the European colonization, it was a paradise, but for the readers who might not have read it yet. So I hope you will, sorry, I somehow got a call on Zoom today, but I would say that in your next books, in your next projects, we would like to see how we all can contribute to this unmaking of the undoing of what colonial suppression and practices have done, and we hope to contribute in some ways in the subaltern practices. Now, if you have any last comments to add, please do so. Otherwise, we'll open the floor for questions.
I'm happy with the questions. I'm also conscious of the time.
So आप अगर आप लोग सवाल करना चाहते हैं, आप हाथ खड़ा कर सकते हैं physically, या फिर I see one question in the chat, which is from Laiba. Laiba, do you want me to read it, or would you like to read it yourself? I can go ahead. So Laiba is asking, what can we do to recreate our own reality, perhaps trace our roots and our own linguistic conceptualization that we have lost? Should we deep dive into history, or there is another way to do it? Or should we reshape the way we think about what is true to us, aka historical accounts of pre-colonial times? Very deep questions that I would say resonate with many of us. So,
it's a very good question and a very difficult question. History is very difficult to get into because most historical sources are adulterated. उसमें गोरों ने बड़ी मिलावट की हुई है, तो historical sources में इतनी मिलावट है कि historical sources पे यकीन करना बड़ा मुश्किल है. We have to remember that pretty much all our books were printed by the West, क्योंकि our part of the world did not use the printing press as a tool of education or of sharing ideas, right? So literacy was not the primary tool. It was instead oral practice. तो ये जो शिफ्ट आई है, it's very relatively recent actually. It's interesting कि अगर हम सोचें कि how long is the history of assessment through reading and writing, so the answer is only about 200-300 years. That's it. So it's not very, very old at all. So, but in those 200-300 years, because of the weaponization of the printing press, we can't really trust histories, including those written by our own people, because they tend to be based on references which go back to the ones that were written and printed by either the colonials or through their direct influence. Now, once you realize that, then it's very difficult to figure out where to find our histories. The best we can do, to my understanding at the present, is to engage in what I call and others call geographical thinking. Thinking around how humans create understandings of the world, how they engage with the world around them in the context of varying geographies, varying climates, varying terrains, because where you live impacts everything. So what you eat is dependent on where you live. What you wear or not wear, or why you wear or not wear things, is dependent on the climate. So when we start realizing that humans, just like any other biological creature, is influenced by the geography that they live in, and that their knowledge is shaped by the geography that they live in, then we can start reconstructing and reclaiming our indigenous knowledges and epistemologies. It's not an impossible task, but it does require quite a bit of work and discipline, and the ability to identify and disassociate ourselves from colonial influences, which is not an easy thing to do, because everything that we see and understand in the world is shaped through the colonial experience.
Thank you very much. This was really a good response to the question. And now we have a question from Muhammad Muzammil. Muzammil, आप माइक्रोफोन पे आना चाहेंगे तो आप पूछ लीजिए, नहीं तो मैं आपका क्वेश्चन पे पढ़ दूंगी.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Assalamu alaikum, madam. And assalamu alaikum, everyone. Am I audible? If I'm audible, I would like to ask a question. I hope it is not irrelevant and doesn't take much of your time. Sir, I have done my undergraduate studies in literature, and I'm now studying linguistics at Mehran University, Jamshoro. So I have been inspired in the idea of using colonialism and nativization, and I find your ideas very inspiring. So I would like to ask you, sir, should we use literature theories and the concepts of colonialism and unorthodox approaches, or do we need to follow the classical theories that are quite complex? Obviously, as you mentioned, that they are based in colonialism and they are questionable. So should we follow them, or should we take a careful approach?
Thank you.
So when you work in a department of language, for example, literature, my honors in Karachi University is in English literature, right? So one of the things that I did my honors in English literature, but then I actually moved. I didn't do my master's in English literature. I did my master's in linguistics, English linguistics. So, and part of the reason I made the transition was very, very conscious. Or a lot of my teachers did not like my decision. In fact, बहुत ज़माने तक मुझसे नाराज़ रहे, कुछ अभी तक नाराज़ हैं कि मैंने लिटरेचर को छोड़ किया और लिंग्विस्टिक्स को ज्वाइन किया. And the reason was that I could not realize or understand the reason why we were learning not just the literature written by the English, पर उन्हीं English के लोगों की तनखीद, उनकी theories on analyzing English literature, उनकी approaches to studying literature, all of it is them, Where is us in any of these studies? If a study of English literature does not, if any study of any literature does not help you with your own creative writing, then what's the point of the degree? Right? So that's what I sort of thought about. It's like, why should I be studying how to criticize other people's writing instead of spending time developing my own writing and learning from other people on how to write? So notice the goal of these departments is not to teach you how to write. And we need people, young people, to learn to write, and not just in English. Apni boli mein we need to write, because we have so many, literature allows people to address and tackle and find solutions to difficult questions in society. It's a safe environment in which you debate difficult questions and find potential solutions in imaginary contexts which you create and call literature. Why is it that we are not reading? Why is it that we are not creating that literature that our community needs? We have dark and difficult problems that need tackling. We need to put thought into these questions. We need to be writing the literature that engages our fellow citizens into thinking about these issues and then to respond to these issues. So I was telling you, Sayyida Zubarba is here. She's a part of the audience here as well. And she's working on her postdoc here with me at the moment. And her whole postdoc is about trying to write a creative work of art, a novel in Boli, representing all the different dialectal variations that we represent on a very important social issue, which is the treatment of Khwaja Sira in our communities. Right, so, and trying to address that issue, not by carrying out a research project or carrying out a survey or no, but by creating a work of art. Right, Sughra is here, she wants to say something about it, so I will actually let her tell you more about her own work.
And not about my own work, but just about the social representation thing, that question, history, how to change, like we cannot go back to change the history, instead social representation thing. And how could I relate that with just a comment I wanted to add with within that thing. As Serge Moscovici says, social representation is familiarizing the unfamiliar, right? But for me, when we say social misrepresentation, that what is done through colonization, that was familiarizing something unfamiliar that is non-existing, and at the same time unfamiliarizing the familiarity of the existing facts. So we need to just once again we need to just decolonize all the things to go back, but they have been familiarized in a way. The facts have been fictionized, and fiction has been factualized. So it may take time, but it took, just as you said, 200 or 300 years. It took them to familiarize those unfamiliarities. So it may take time, but we need to positive is not that active, I believe. Negative powers are more active, so they plan and they implement, while positivity is less active. So I think we need to be as active as the negative powers are to do that. Just
thank you very much.
Say that. Thank you. Thank you.
This was really enlightening. We got a good idea of what you are doing. There are a couple of questions in the chat. एक तो मैं ये कहना चाहूँगी कि अहमद ने अपनी बुक आप लोगों के साथ PDF में शेयर की है, जो आप लोगों ने देख ली होगी, तो आप उसको डाउनलोड कर दें। बहुत शुक्रिया आपका। और एक सवाल था, how can we buy your book? So the book is already here. और एंथनी ने पूछा है, thank you for your book description. I'm in the process of creating a Leo-Kenyan language dictionary. what is the best way to decolonize this process? और ज़ैनब का सवाल है जो कि इससे काइंड ऑफ रिलेटेड है, वो पूछ रही हैं हम कैसे लिंग्विस्टिक्स को सही कर सकते हैं.
Oh, very good questions. For the first question, one of the questions, why are we writing a dictionary per se? Instead of, I mean, sometimes I think instead of writing a dictionary in general, if we think of particular uses of where a dictionary will be used. So that's the key thing about how I see trying to incorporate current forms of linguistics into what we need to do. In my own work, I abandon all of it. But I recognize that other people cannot. And so they have to be able to use it in the work that they're doing. So then the best way of trying to create a decolonial approach within it is to think not of what you are creating, so not of that you're creating a dictionary, but think more of why you are creating what you're creating. What is the issue or the community need that you will be able to address by creating it? Think of what benefits will it bring to the community by being available. So thinking more of why we're doing it and how what we do is going to improve the situation and the conditions that we're in. That needs to be the motivator behind the project, whether it's a dictionary project or any other project that draws on pre-existing approaches to linguistics. So essentially, it's the goal of the project that needs to be credible. That means it needs to have a benefit for the people. And if that's what the driver is, the rest of the things can be adjusted. I guess that also answers in a way the second question that, of course, how do we fix it? My own approach, I abandon it. You can't fix something that has so many problems, is inherently full of holes. So in my own work, I abandon it. But again, I recognize that it can't be abandoned in all contexts. So then what can be done then is instead of making the theoretical description of a language the goal of doing language study, or rather than making the study of attitudes as a purpose of the study, or doing a study of anything else, of classroom teaching approaches, a survey of teaching approaches, rather than doing these surveys and these studies and these descriptions, we can think about the goals of being to create a betterment, to create an improvement, to create the resources, and then use our linguistics, our surveys as an intermediary step at the most in order to achieve to our goals. So our goals need to be changed. If our goals become one that are creating benefit, then everything else will realign in accordance with the goals. And that's one of the ways in which we can fix these things, by realigning our goals.
Thank you. I think related to Anthony's question of the dictionaries, I would also like to say that in your book, and you've also mentioned it today, the concept of Boli. So I would like to take this opportunity to ask, does a Boli need a dictionary?
For specific goals and purposes, maybe. So for example, let's say if you are, let's say you live in northern Pakistan, let's say you live in Hunza Valley, and part of your professional life is that you are a guide that takes tourists on hikes and expeditions to various mountains in the region. Now, in that context, might be useful for you to have access to a basic dictionary that allows you to communicate and learn the key issue words and concepts that can help with your profession and can make that whole experience more positive and safer for everybody. right? So in that context, a dictionary can be useful for that goal. But notice that it's a goal that is determining what the dictionary will include. So the dictionary then will be for guides who are mountain climbing guides or expedition leaders, a dictionary for people who lead expeditions or work in tourist industry in the northern Pakistan, right? So the dictionary is then purpose driven rather than being just a dictionary by itself. So that's how I see it. It's how we are driven rather than what we create. Going back to the question of niyat.
And this brings us to two last questions, but I think I've seen also Dr. Sayyida Sughra Naqvi raise hand, please. The floor is yours.
Just a quick question I asked earlier from Sunny Boy as well. That was like if we are writing, we are producing literature in Boli. So what if the obviously Boli of different people, different that thing. So do we need to translate it? Would that be now necessary to translate it so that the ones who don't understand the Boli of Khaja Sara community or someone else, they be understanding that thing too?
Think about the Clockwork Orange as a work of art. When you start reading it, you don't recognize most of the vocabulary. It's not the regular English language. But by the time you get into the first few chapters, you start understanding it, right? So you realize that experience of reading the Clockwork Orange tells us that as a reader, people can actually engage with the work of art and pick up the language and the cues in the language quite quickly. So you don't need to do those translations and things, right? So the language itself represents the variations in characters and their histories. And so the Khaja Sira, in the way they speak, represents a whole set of social experiences, and their use of language reflects a particular perspective on life in reality. And you have to use their language to represent it. It can't be done through anything else. So in that sense, Boli works really well for literary in creativity because it captures the nuances and variations of experiences and characters, which is totally lost when we and our authors tend to write in English. Often the characters fall pretty flat because the language variations their language should be representing are just not there anymore. And so they're using Boli in that sense of literary creativity. I think it's very important. And keeping it with Boli, no need to translate. Let the readers evolve and emerge and develop their own understandings.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think this is kind of also like if somebody moves from, like, let's say Karachi to Lahore, or Lahore to Islamabad, or Islamabad to Peshawar, or as you mentioned earlier as well, like if a truck driver is going from Karachi to Peshawar, you pick up the different nuances in the way people speak. तो वो उसमें हो जाता है. अच्छा, इसमें दो सवाल हैं. एक बिलाल अहमद का, अगर आप खुद पूछना चाहें, नहीं तो मैं आपका क्वेश्चन पढ़ देती हूँ.
Yes, ma'am. I have actually two questions, but I would like to know the answer of this very important question. That I am a teacher in private college here in Sargodha, and I have observed this very strange attitude of our higher authorities that they advise us not to speak to our students in Punjabi language. The reason is that they have associated negative attitudes with this language, and even if a student speaks in this language, he is strictly advised to stop speaking in this language. So my question actually is, how can we actually delete such kind of attitudes and negative associations with this language?
Thank you. Wonderful question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And attitudes toward languages prevail everywhere. Very often because of misinformation about and misconception about what language is, but regardless of the reasons they exist. Now, one of the things that we probably all recognize is that trying to influence and change somebody else's beliefs or behaviors is one of the most difficult things to do in the world. So maybe that shouldn't be our goal at all. Instead of trying to create, instead of trying to influence other people's beliefs, instead of spending time doing that, which is something which is difficult, if not impossible to do, we could spend the same amount of time creating practices that will demonstrate the benefit of using Punjabi within the school context. Being able to demonstrate that your students are able to perform better when you draw on Punjabi as a resource within education. If your students are performing better, then you have a case to show how that they're better because of the use of Punjabi. And it is the results of your students that can then perhaps influence others in their thoughts. So notice, instead of trying to address other people's beliefs, you are trying to create a practice. The results of the practice may indirectly influence their beliefs. And that's the best we can do. And I would say that's the best strategy for us to use, because it keeps us positive. It doesn't engage us into negativity. It doesn't get us into useless arguments, but rather it helps us create something that can influence change.
So Bilal, do you have another question? Because I'll then move to Bilal Jafar's question.
Yes, ma'am. I have another question. Is it so simple to change our identity linguistically, because it is deeply rooted in our psychology too? So, for example, if my friend calls me in a kind of identity I want to be associated with, okay, so this is related to the language or a psychology. Is it so simple?
Psychology as a discipline of a study is a colonial discipline. It doesn't exist, right? The whole idea of psychology is based on the Cartesian, or Descartes, who is a French philosopher, and Descartes, or the Cartesian philosophy, or the duality of the mind and body, right? That is a philosophical argument through which Descartes argues that the mind and the body, or the matter and mind, are two distinct things, which is the foundation for colonial knowledges. This is why, for example, जब आप बीमार होते हैं तो आप डॉक्टर के पास जाते हैं, और जब आपको स्ट्रेस होता है या एंजाइटी होती है या डिप्रेशन होता है तो आप साइकोलॉजिस्ट के पास जाते हैं. तो डॉक्टर्स आपकी बॉडी ट्रीट करते हैं और साइकोलॉजिस्ट आपकी माइंड को देखते हैं. ये डिवीजन जो है बेस्ड, ये डेकार्ट्स की फिलॉसफी में बेस्ड है. अब ये नोट करिए, ये डिवीजन जो है ये रियलिटी में बेस्ड नहीं है. आपका माइंड और आपकी बॉडी अलग अलग नहीं एग्जिस्ट करते. आपकी माइंड आपका बॉडी का हिस्सा है. आपकी बॉडी जैसी है वैसे ही आपका माइंड भी होगा. माइंड और बॉडी साथ साथ ऑपरेट करते हैं, मिले हुए हमेशा. ये सेपरेशन जो है ये कॉलोनियल स्ट्रेटजी है जिसके थ्रू हमारे माइंड्स को कंट्रोल किया जा सके. यानी कि आप अपनी बॉडी को कहीं और छोड़ दें और माइंड को कहीं और डाल दें. तो फॉर एग्जांपल, हम एजुकेशन थ्योरीज में हज़ार तक की बातें करते हैं, मोटिवेशन की और एंजाइटी की और लर्निंग की और कॉग्निटिव डेवलपमेंट की और ये थ्योरी और वो थ्योरी, मगर हम ये नहीं देखते कि हमारा स्कूल तो गटर के बराबर है. पूरे वक्त गटर की बू आ रही है, गर्मी बेहद है, 45-50 बच्चे जो हैं छोटे से कमरे में हैं जिधर पंखा भी नहीं है. तो जो फिजिकल रियलिटी है उस एनवायरनमेंट में जिसमें हमारी बॉडी एग्जिस्ट करती है, उस बॉडी फिजिकल एग्जिस्टेंस में हमारा माइंड को कैसे आप एजुकेट कर सकते हैं, कैसे लिबरल बना सकते हैं, कैसे खुला जहन बना सकते हैं, क्योंकि माइंड और बॉडी को एग्जिस्ट करते हैं टुगेदर. तो ये सोचना कि हमारी साइकोलॉजी ऐसा है और लैंग्वेज अलग है, तो ये एक्चुअली ये हमारी सोच को गलत डायरेक्शन में डाला हुआ है गोरों ने। आपकी बॉडी और माइंड हमेशा जुड़ा हुआ रहता है, और अगर हम इसको अलग कर दें तो हम अपने आप को तोड़ देते हैं। हमारे कौल और फ़इल में तज़ाद आ जाता है। और नोट करिए, हमारी अपने जो आबा अजदाद थे, हमारे अपने जो बुज़ुर्ग हैं, वो कहते हैं कि कौल और फ़ेल में कभी तज़ाद नहीं होना चाहिए। यानी कि एक्शन में और माइंड में, प्रैक्टिस में और माइंड में, बॉडी और माइंड में सेपरेशन नहीं है। तो यही बातें हैं, किसकी वजह से मैं कह रहा था कि ये हमको सिर्फ लिंग्विस्टिक्स को क्वेश्चन नहीं करना, हमको पूरा का पूरा वेस्टर्न एकेडेमिया और नॉलेज मेकिंग को क्वेश्चन करना है, सारे डिसिप्लिन्स।
Thank you. Which brings us to our last question. Even though we have been reminded now कि बहुत काम हमें करना है, वो ये है सवाल कि how can we balance the use of English for global communication with the need to keep indigenous languages alive when crafting a new a national language policy, for example, Pakistan. So I would say we did kind of that today, but आप क्या कहते हैं?
Exactly. So notice this is what we did today, and Ali and I discussed this yesterday. Okay, we will keep it a natural translingual environment where we'll shift between Boli and what is considered English, you know, and we'll move around between these things just as naturally as we would in a context where multiple people are present who speak who have different ways of languaging, right? So, but we are all able to language, and in that context, it's very interesting that even though there's a lot of translanguaging going on, people who don't speak Boli will still be able to understand quite a lot of what's happening, and that's part of the experience of being engaged in Boli, because it is an action, that a performance that is usually taken in reality, in face-to-face with each other, in which context we have a lot of other cues in addition to the sounds, right? We've got the physical presence, we've got gestures, we've got smell, we've got everything else that's happening in reality in a human interaction. And when those interactions take place, the sharedness of the sound, yes, it's important, but it's not the most important things. This is why, for example, humans can create new pidgin languages when they don't have a shared language. They can create creoles when they don't have shared language. So that's a natural human ability that we all have.
Sir, was the division between Urdu and Hindi a colonial decision
Yes.
in order to practice divide and rule?
Absolutely, absolutely, very much so. Very consciously done. Very consciously done to create divisions within the community so that the Europeans could take advantage and control the populations. It's not just in South Asia that the Europeans did. They did it everywhere they have conquered. Not just the English, the Spanish, the Dutch, the Germans, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, they all did the same wherever they went. So that is part of the European colonial experiences that we're all struggling with because it hasn't ended yet.
What a wonderful question, and I would say कि ना सिर्फ हिंदी और उर्दू, अगर इस वक्त सनी बॉय सिंधी बोलें या पंजाबी बोलें या कुछ पश्तो बोलें और या बलोची बोलें या और भी जो भी हमने नाम उन लेबल्स दिए हैं, तो वो भी हमें किसी हद तक समझ आ जाएगी, और जितना हम अपने कानों को प्रैक्टिस करेंगे तो वो सब शेड्स हमें समझ आ जाएंगे। उसके अलावा जैसे एक बहुत अच्छी मिसाल आपने अपनी किताब में दी हुई है नानी की बोली, और आई थिंक दादी की बोली, फूफी की बोली, चची की बोली। तो हम सब जानते हैं कि जब हम अपने घर से निकलते हैं और इन सब रिश्तेदारों को, या अगर हम एक जगह रहते हैं, तो हमारी वो जुबान जो हम जैसे बोलते हैं वो एक जैसी हो जाती है। तो मुझे ये भी आपकी मिसाल किताब में बहुत मुफीद लगी, जो हमारे एक्सपीरियंसेस के बहुत ज़्यादा करीब है। हम तकरीबन 1.5 घंटे से इस महफिल में मौजूद हैं, और मुझे आप सबके कमेंट्स से और आपके सवालात से अंदाज़ा हो रहा है कि आप कितने सनी बॉय की गुफ्तगू से आपको इसका इस्तेफादा हुआ है और आपको मजा आया है और आपको मजीद आपके जहनों में सवालात जागे हैं. And I guess that is also the purpose of your book and where you have reached in your academic and intellectual life. And I hope we can organize such discussions at another point, because our work to undo the colonial linguistics hasn't completed, and we know that we are still facing all the divisions which were imposed on us, and new ones have been created. But we want to thank Sunny Boy to give us his precious time on this Sunday morning at my end, but Sunday evening at your end.
Thank you, everybody. Shukriya.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so very much. It was a really great discussion, and yeah,
Yeah,
clapping
let's not
for.
forget to clap for Sunny Boy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. All right. Khuda Hafiz. Bye-bye.